Welcome to the All Ambient podcast, where we dig into the creative process, hear untold stories, and explore the brilliant minds behind some of the finest ambient music out there. I'm your host, Mike Graff. I'm excited to be in this together with you. Let's get going. Again, welcome to the All Ambient podcast, everyone. My name is Mike Graff. I make music as Dear Gravity. Had a chance to do a round 2 interview with none other than Marshall Usinger of Be Still the Earth today. You hear Marshall regularly on the Roundtable and Music News episodes. We had a great one-on-one interview back in the day, early on in the All Ambient podcast world. But today we sat down for a round 2 and we dug in specifically to the balance of working on music production versus post-production. I know that those two worlds have a lot in common with each other, but then they are also quite different from each other. And as a lot of artists tend to do a lot of the tasks themselves instead of having a team around them, we talked a bit about how one approaches mindset-wise the balance between production and post-production. If there are certain things one can do to help each other out in that scenario, or if there are certain things that in fact get in the way when you start thinking about post-production while you're doing production, or vice versa, all sorts of stuff. Marshall had some great perspective. I really appreciate his heart. You're not going to want to miss this. Let's dig right into my conversation with Marshall Usinger of Be Still the Earth. Here we go, friends. Welcome back to the interview seat. Our dear friend, Marshall Usinger, Be Still the Earth, mastering extraordinaire of the slow echo world. And I could probably list off 5 or 6 other just as impressive accolades of yours, but well, I'm just doing my best to keep you a little humble. So we'll stop there. But
thank
man,
you.
really glad to have you. Thanks for hanging out for round 2, man. Another interview. Really grateful.
Yep, of course, man. Thanks for having me back on. I appreciate it.
Well,
you can't keep me away.
Would I try though? I truly would not. It is true. No, I love how often we get to connect on the roundtables and the music news and all that, and just a joy to beyond that, just to make music together in a variety of different collab ways and partner ways, and then beyond that, you're just a great person, man. I love the times we get to just spend together virtually or in person and all that. It is it's always a blessing. So here we are.
Yeah.
I feel like if I'm not really good about staying on track with my talking points, I feel like I could let this tangent real fast into us talking about all the things we always talk about, but not that that's a bad thing, just attempting to respect the clock for everyone who's listening and all that. But I love kind of where we went the first time that you were on for the one-on-one interview and just kind of sharing a little bit more about your journey, your story. Man, I've been chewing something over though, and I really wanted, you were the perfect person that came off top of my mind when I was thinking about this particular question. But something that I get asked a lot as a musician, as a producer, is from those who have a hard time figuring out the difference between production and post-production. And I don't mean like a literal definition of what those two are, because I think we could probably all arrive at something cohesive in that lane, but more so the idea of like, okay, I am an independent musician, or I am a solo artist. I'm creating pretty much everything myself. There can be a little bit of a deer in the headlights sort of thing when someone starts realizing that not only are they responsible for, creating all these sounds and melodies and structure and arrangement and core, they're like just what those progressions look like and how long a song is and all those things. At some point you begin to realize that it's not just the actual like producing of the song, the composing of the song, but then there's the whole post side of it. What is each one of those instruments doing sonically? What is it doing? Like what's it doing within the frequency range? What's it doing in relation, volume wise or frequency wise or panning wise to everything else that's going on? And then you bring in, like mastering into the equation and getting everything ready for, for worldwide distribution and consumption and how it, kind of meets the same sort of benchmarks as, a lot of traditional and commercial stuff out there. It can be a lot, right? Like, especially for a self-taught someone from the get-go. And so I think one of the things that I hear most often is the idea of, man, I'm working on a song, but then all of a sudden, like I get kind of frustrated with the mix of how everything's coming together. So I start working on that, but then I get kind of distracted and I don't actually go back and work more on the actual melody that I wanted to, or I just, completely, lose track of where the song is headed because I started thinking about, like all the post-production stuff. And I'm just having a hard time separating the two. And so I want to talk to you because you're an incredible musician, composer, producer, but also like you are a ninja in the post-production lane too. And again, I mentioned it at the top, but at this point, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you are now handling mastering for pretty much every slow echo release that goes out to the world. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
That is correct. And in addition to, I'm sure, the private clients that approach you and stuff that you do, and then also just, you handling your own things, whether it's for licensing libraries or for your own projects. Yeah, you are not just great on the production side, but also on the post-production side. So
thanks, man.
I think you're going to be a unique person to weigh in on maybe kind of sifting through the weeds a little bit on how to talk somebody off a ledge who is getting overwhelmed by producing, but also post-producing. Maybe a good place to start would be hearing a little bit about your creative process, specifically as it relates to production versus post-production. Like, do you draw kind of a hard line in your head as far as, okay, I am not going into mixing and mastering mode right now. This is what I'm doing right now. And then you kind of shift over there, or have you kind of fostered it to a place where you're sort of doing both at the same time and it just took a while? I don't want to put answers in your mouth. I just want to kind of start with your process and just let it evolve from there. So is that a decent place to start?
Yeah. Yeah. This is good stuff, dude. And
cool.
thank you for the kind words. I do feel like it's a bit interesting, just my journey on, I guess, just making music in general and then production and then doing it for work and these things, because I specifically with mastering, like I kind of just started doing that in the beginning because I was mostly making music for licensing, as you know. And
sure, yep.
I think it's probably fairly, most of my friends and people I knew in that world, like I know for those specific kind of projects, they were for the most part probably having like mastering their own stuff. Mm-hmm. But me then kind of taking it slightly further and doing the stuff for slow echo and then some of the echoes in the valley stuff too. Like that was kind of just something that came along.
Yeah.
But that being said, is like, I'm not, focused as a mastering engineer, but I feel like I have a bit of a unique perspective on that end, just being more of a producer and instrumentalist, maybe when, a lot of mastering engineers that I know, focus solely on that. But when it comes to a project, I would love to hear what you do as well on this, by the way, but I
promise you we're coming from different places, which will be really good for the conversation and for those listening for sure. But
I feel like I recall one of the first times you and I had a virtual hangout and we're talking about making some music, and you were kind of like, I just need you to know that I kind of just go and don't like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the gist of what you said was...
You are not wrong, man.
I feel like the gist of what you said was, I just kind of like go and I don't touch anything and I just like record all the ideas, and please know that everything I'm sending you has like not really been mixed or anything yet. And obviously what you sent me like sounded amazing as it was, but my approach is definitely different because I kind of feel like I have to do some at least mixing as I'm going.
Yeah.
Or else I kind of get maybe, I don't know, it's not, I don't want to say overwhelmed, but I think it's maybe just a workflow that's kind of developed over time, where maybe an example might be like, if I'm working on something more that has a beat and percussion and, if I'm tracking bass, I kind of want to be carving out space to track the bass. And, I'm looking for kind of the sweet spot of where I can still hear the kick. And like, if I'm, and especially when it comes to maybe like a synth and you're going through parts you want to add or, background chords or a melody, I feel like I'm kind of, as you're doing the thing that we do, looking to find a sound, I am kind of thinking through, okay, let me cut some of the mids out of this pad because I hear that I like this sound, or, oh, this lead doesn't sound great. It's kind of like got too much high end up here, cut some of that. Yeah. So it's kind of like, for me, I feel like there's an element of, I guess, excitement as I'm creating the piece as it is. And as you're feeling what you're doing and you're liking where it's going, I kind of feel like I'm sort of piecing it together in some sense how I want it to sound in the end before I'm, actually putting all the ideas down. Mm-hmm. So I hope that answers that somewhat, but yeah, it's always been like it has always been for me a dual-esque thing of, kind of mixing as I go. Yeah. And I would say the more and maybe this is kind of more on the end of what is post-production and what does that actually mean in the sense of when you're creating music. I would say kind of like the more maybe hands-on compression or things like that. I don't really touch anything like that until the end. Yeah. If I'm tracking my guitar or maybe tracking an acoustic guitar, I will kind of do compression and stuff like that on the back end. Mm-hmm. Now, making ambient music, we don't do a lot of compression in ambient music, but
speak for yourself. No.
Yeah. Well, actually, fun fact about me. Yeah. So there's a little bit of that too, though, I guess. And that's where I also, I know we could talk about this for a while, but there's a workflow thing about that, if maybe you're, if someone is playing with some analog stuff and you have EQ going in, that's great. I don't pretty much the only thing I have that has EQ going in is my preamps that I track piano with. And I have a little sweet spot set on there that I like that just kind of pushes a little bit of the very top end, which is hard to get. And so there's stuff like that I like to have, but yeah, generally it's very end of the idea itself where it's okay, is there anything more that we want to touch before we get to the mastering part? So yeah, man, that's, it can be jumbled, as but
yeah, well, you're well versed in both sides of it, in the production and the post-production. I think one of the advantages that I won't just say that you have, it would be something that would disqualify other people, but I think it is an advantage that you have nurtured, that you have kind of helped grow in your own lane, is that by way of doing some of the post-production and then now that becoming, more regular thing, it's as though you are kind of being able to, I use the 50,000 foot view sort of idea a lot. And so when you're in that seat that you're in, you are now able to zoom out a little bit and be okay, so this is kind of what I need to arrive at in order to shape it in post-production with, the mastering side to make it sound really cool. So what am I kind of what you were saying, what the individual instruments, and let's roll off a little bit of this, let's filter this out, let's make some room. That is the sort of thing where you could learn it on a YouTube video, but you don't know it until your ears have heard it and have made a mistake with it and then have tweaked it or have, corrected it. And all of a sudden you're just oh, that feels so much different. You know what I mean? It's
for sure
a learned behavior. And that's not to say that there aren't great tools of the trade, that there aren't great, just practices that you can put into place to take big steps right away. But I really do think just the experience of you doing all of it has helped you just think of it as a less daunting scenario, if you know what I mean. Yes.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. I just feel that's what you just kind of touched on there is just puts into words what I try to communicate to people when they do ask me how did you learn to do this or this or this? And it seems very simple, right? You learn something by doing it, but specifically I would say more on the end of mastering when I didn't, it's kind of you get into making music and then, oh yeah, okay, we have to figure out mastering. I think I just encourage people, and what's worked for me is kind of, yes, you start doing something like this as a routine and regularly, and then you learn to start trusting your ears and your workflow, and you're kind of, you're picking up things. Maybe you, like you said, maybe you kind of find something here and there you might hear back and like, oh, I don't like that. Or, and so, I just think that's to kind of point back to your beginning question of, it can seem overwhelming, like feeling, a lot of us who make music are doing it solo for the most part. And
right.
I think there's something to be said about the process of like learning and gaining knowledge as we go via the people we make music with and the feedback we get. And that's kind of one end. It allows us to push ourselves a little bit. And then there's also the end of, okay, I also have this foundation that I can like trust that has brought me to this position that I'm in, that people are trusting me to either make music with them if it's like a client or a partner you're working with, or people are trusting you to, do mastering for them. It's like, you've proven that you've put some things out into the world that have been received well. And I kind of just feel like I try to use that as like an encouragement for, hey, like, no matter where you are in the journey, it's like, it kind of embrace what you have been able to kind of build your experience with and sort of trust that, and rather than feeling like, oh, I'm not using this mastering thing, or that's the whole end of the comparison stuff too. But at least for me with mastering specifically, that has been encouraging feedback that I've received, is just like, oh, there's like a sort of sound or quality that seems to just translate, because that's just how I, hear the stuff. And that's kind of the sound that I've developed. And with the label Slow Echo stuff specifically, I'm very like grateful and humbled by that there's something there enough to notice like, okay, that's kind of like, it's got, your mastering sound to it, which if people appreciate, that's great. Like, I love that, you can't really ask for much more when you're not sure about what you're doing most of the time.
Right. Like, hey, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Whew.
Thanks.
Hey, praise God. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, absolutely.
Ozone is excellent. Well, we won't get it. We won't get into that.
Yeah.
Ozone actually is great, but
That's what I was going to ask next. And again, like, I don't want to separate the experience and the training your ears, like just going through the reps and doing that. I don't want to separate that from the conversation about specific tools or specific assets that you use to get you there. But I think it would be helpful to talk about, maybe what you do in the mastering process that helps. And I know you just mentioned Ozone. I don't use it a ton. I have it, but I know that there's, and maybe you'll be able to correct me. I think it's called Total Balance Control or something like that. Like there's something within and maybe it's not Ozone, maybe it's more of just the isotope, ecosystem, but something where you're able to essentially feed every one of your stems, every channel into this thing. And it just kind of shows where it is laid out over with different colors, like where it's laid out over the frequency spectrum. And you can kind of, at that point, you can see where you are creating frequency issues. Like you can see where there are like 3 or 4 of your stems that are just, all right on top of each other. And then I think within that, you can even start to shape each of them a little bit. And that's sort of, again, that's beyond what I personally do with it, but I have just a little bit of a different process. But not that you use that tool per se, but I'm curious what you wind up doing with your mastering stuff. Please.
I have used that tool in the past as well. And
is it cool? Does it like do the job?
I mean, it does. I think this is a great little maybe example of like just something someone else pointed out to me or learning along the way kind of thing. Is I was long and short, I did some mastering for a library and, had some different like styles coming through, which a couple of which were like more pop driven tracks and like a couple hip hop tracks. And, that's not stuff that I personally have a ton of experience making.
Yeah.
So I remember sending back the master to one of the artists and he pinged me back and was like, hey, I feel like there's a little too much of this frequency. And he said, I use tonal balance control. I think that's what it's called. He said, I use the pop. He was basically like, I use the pop preset on tonal balance control.
Got it.
To kind of like find where my frequency range is. And, so can you try putting a little more of this? And, I was that I was more than happy to do that, of course. But for me, like, yeah, just not having a lot of experience mastering those specific styles, it's kind of like, yeah, there's more. I mean, obviously, like pop music has a lot more sparkle and sheen than,
Right.
you know, ambient and cinematic music might have. And I think, and at the time when I was making more library music, what I did like about that specific plugin was how, yeah, you can basically just dump in a bunch of wave files of your choosing, and it will kind of like create your own algorithm of across the spectrum of, you know, where you want as much of each frequency.
Which is pretty cool. Yeah.
That is pretty cool. Yeah. And I think I don't use that anymore either, just because it's, I mean, kind of like previously just said, sort of trusting my ears, at least in the stuff that I am mastering and working with. I don't need to kind of use that much anymore. But so that's a little tangent on that. On the end of mastering, this again seems simple to say as well, but I feel like one of the initial things I kind of had to figure out as I was going was just putting together a specific chain as just a place to start. And that wasn't like always the case. I mean, for the most part, I had kind of the same pieces. Maybe here and there, certain things would be coming before others or things like that. And what I do, man, is like, I consider pretty simple. And yeah, I pretty much with anything that's ambient music, we'll just leave it at that for initial start, is I kind of have an EQ. I have like a digital EQ, like a fab filter or whatever's in there at the time. And then I do have a couple pieces of hardware that I like to use. And one of them is a mastering EQ.
Awesome.
And one of them is the SSL Fusion, which I've had for many years now, and has probably been, to me, it's been like one of the best investments I've made, just because before I was making ambient music, you know, before I was making more artist-driven music, things like that really helped kind of, I think that tool itself kind of just helped me along the way as learning mastering and how I wanted my stuff to sound just in the end. So that's a tool that I love, and I love using it for ambient music just because I feel like it brings some really nice warmth generally to pretty much everything. And then I kind of have like a mastering tape that I have at the very end, just one of the UAD tape things. Yeah. And that's kind of it, man. Yeah. Just like very dialed down than maybe some things I, you know, had done in the past when you feel like, you know, oh, there's not enough on here, or, you know, this, I have to like make this, I have to have compression because that's what mixes have and things like that. Right. So yeah, it might look a little different for if I'm working on stuff with drums or things like that, just depending on maybe how much EQ I might use. I think I'm sure we've talked about this on the roundtables a little bit, but it's kind of overwhelming, right? When there's so much new stuff coming out all the time that it's like, on one hand, we like to kind of keep up with stuff that's helpful, but also like not be overwhelmed with feeling the need to like change out our entire workflow. Yep. I still have like, I have the Slate digital stuff, subscription stuff that I do still use on masters, just because there's a few of those things that I find very useful, whether it's just like an EQ, you can get a bit more exact on, if you want to call it that, or, you know, so I have some tools that I've been using for, you know, probably 5 years or so that just work really well. And kind of just like keeping, I don't mean to simplify it, and, you know, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But yeah, I think I've got better with feeling like I have to keep up with like trends of, you know, getting new stuff and changing up like, pieces of gear or whatever. I have kind of like the same 2 pieces of hardware that I use for mastering, and that gets really nice in the end. So yeah,
I love that. Thanks for sharing all that. And you know, I think there are a couple, I mean, there's a ton of takeaways from that, but I think a couple of the big ones probably have a lot to do with, it's nice to hear that there's not some sort of like secret weapon that, you know, people are like, oh, well, if you just load this up and it'll, you know, and it costs, you know, $bazillion, but it makes everything sound great. Like it's not really a secret weapon, if you will. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, like you've invested into your setup and like it's, you know, that like there's some really cool things happening both outward and you know, like in the box, out of the box, all the stuff. But like what you're talking about are things that are in one way or another are accessible to just about anybody who wants to give the post-production side a shot, right? Like anybody is able to get their hands on some type, whether it's, a $20, kind of a limited version of a plugin, or if they want to go, drop on an SSL Fusion or, everything in between. There are options for sure. But it's nice to know that it has a lot more to do with you knowing, and, there is knowledge that comes along with that. Like, hey, what does this EQ or, like this band of EQing, like that's really working with, where a couple of like typical synth pad frequencies sort of roam around here. So I'm messing with that, or this, like you have knowledge of what whether they're plugins or your outboard gear, what those things do, and you're able to kind of manipulate it in very subtle, very small ways, but just that allow it to continue to produce that result that you want, as opposed to, okay, I bought a plugin, I dropped it on, I hit the, I hit the ambient button, or I hit the pop button or the whatever, and poof, there it goes.
Yeah.
Not to say that those things don't exist, or that they, truthfully, can get you like a decent percentage of the way there. Like it's like, wow, that sounds pretty good. But there's so much in those final percentage points. There's so much in the detail, in the individuality of every song that has different instruments, that comes from, a different recording session, that has a different harp behind it, that's on a different release. There is no one size fits all for sure. So it can be an encouragement to know that there's not, a silver bullet, but also it might be a little deflating for some to hear that there's not a silver bullet. And it's like, oh, you mean I gotta like put in the reps, I gotta do the work, I gotta listen to this, and I gotta figure it's, well, yeah, you do, but not in a way that should feel daunting, or that should, spin you off into, like, I'm never going to be able to get anything done, but more so in the sense of education, of just be willing to try things out, getting off the expectation of this song needs to be released by this date, or this song has to have, sound like this or this and that. Like just try things and work with it, and you will learn, a boatload along the way for sure.
Oh, dude.
And
I'm gonna slightly cut you off there, but
do it, please.
You brought a good reminder to me as well, as far as like, I want to emphasize maybe to some folks who are getting started or feeling like, how can we make improvements and that sort of thing, is like, I do not have a big fancy mastering room or setup, or, I have speakers that I've used for a number of years that I've learned how they sound, and I know, whatever kind of music I'm working on, I know how they're sounding coming through the speakers. I know how that's going to translate coming through, my car or coming through my AirPods. Like, not trying to ruffle any feathers here if they don't want to be ruffled, but I am not a person who goes and references my mix in the car before I master it. Or,
you're not.
When I master it, I don't go check it in the car to see how it sounds generally, because I have learned to be confident enough in the stuff that I have. I know how that's coming through.
Yeah.
I actually think the speakers that I have, they're probably like a little bit more colored than, like the super flat ones that guys like to use a lot of the time. And I just kind of feel like that was my experience learning, is that's how it came out, and that's how I learned to kind of like develop my sound. I think there is a big advantage of, if you are someone who is able to acoustically treat your room, and, that is a great investment to make. But if you're not able to do that, work with what you have and learn, now that process does take time, right? Maybe that does in the beginning take like, okay, when I listen to this in the car, there's actually a ton of bass. And that was something that used to happen to me, is I would take a mix to the car and the bass would just be like, who doesn't love that, right? I mean, gosh, that's the best. I love bass. So there's a lot of bass in the mix, but that was for me what took some additional time. But I think that's just an important piece of like, there's not a magic plugin that we can put on. And I think there is definitely like certain projects that, there's certain projects where you can use Ozone and you can like turn on the auto mastering as like a place to start. If you're learning, that's great. And then turn on the auto mastering and then find things that you don't like about what's coming through and just start tweaking it from there.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, if I could have some like incredible mastering room, that'd be sick. But I've just, like most of us, I think I've kind of learned to, we all know how it sounds in the space that we make music in. And that's just a big thing to keep in mind, I think, as far as like, you don't have to, drop a ton of money on some speakers or whatever. There's something about learning and working with what you have at the time. So yeah.
Yeah. I'm with you. Yeah. There's something about some of the like unsexy things about, the whole process, like, just, dialing in your room and putting up acoustic stuff or using a piece of software that kind of helps like neutralize, frequency or just what, like there's all the things that are not like super cool and creative to do, but are worth the time and, a little bit of investment or whatever, but it's worth that so that you can be that much more creative, that much more productive with your creativity time because you have kind of figured out some of the back end, some of the fences around how to get this stuff out into the world sounding the way that you want other people to hear it. And I think that's it is more attainable than we think, even if we have to do a couple things that we maybe don't necessarily, it's not like the coolest thing to do, but it's worth it. So I'm really grateful for you weighing in on this. I don't think we're even done with the conversation, but for the sake of time, maybe we just revisit this when we want to revisit this. But man, you are a champ, Marshall. Thanks for modeling all this well. Thanks for just investing not only on the artist side, but also on the post-production side into countless releases that are out there.
Yeah.
You're the best. Appreciate you, man. Thanks for weighing in.
Thanks, dude. Yep.
Thank you for listening to the All Ambient podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you can catch every conversation we have with all these incredible people who share the same passion. I'm looking forward to the next time, and I hope you are too. Can't wait to see you then, and until then, have an incredible day. Here's hoping this music and the heart behind it makes your day and life that much better. We'll see you next time.